people are just going to vanish and be running off the road because there's things that got to happen. There's a shout, and then we'll get into the rest of it too. I think there'll be a little bit of time between the time it starts and the time it ends.
Should we have a go bag with us?
Yeah, right. So if you hear it, yeah, the essentials kit.
The kids had a
Rapture
video on.
Essentials. I'm gonna start selling them.
I was in the
Rapture essentials.
Be the first now to purchase.
$29.99.
Act now. So if you're driving a car, pull over. When you hear a shout, pull over. Make sure the autopilot's engaged. You know, if anybody's
just click it.
in a plane, on the right side there's something that says CMDA. That's Command A. That'll engage the main channel of the autopilot. You just hit that button, and then you can sit back and wait for the rest of it to come along, and your plane's not just going to go diving out of the air. And then go inside and look up, because the most exciting thing that can happen in our lives is about to happen. And when you do that, listen.
We're like the
The next thing, listen. So after the shout, get safely somewhere, look up, and then listen for the voice, because that's what's coming next.
Oh no.
The winner of the voice.
Voice. So in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the Archangel. So who or what is an Archangel? There's actually a lot of debate over this. Some people say that the voice of the Archangel is actually like Jesus, like speaking with the authority of like an angel, or the JWs believe that Jesus is like an angel. So there's definitely some confusion of like who this voice belongs to, but I'm just going to take it literally the way it is written. It says the voice of the Archangel. The word arch is it's a prefix, and it means ruling or chief. So it's going to mean it's some ruling angel or some chief angel that is going to speak and have something to say at this point. There's only one angel in the Bible that's called the Archangel. Wait for it.
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I was gonna ask because I remember I was gonna ask I do remember saying Michael the Archangel.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so
Yep.
it's probably Michael.
Yeah.
Old Mikey.
Drum roll. There's only one angel. Michael. Yes, Michael is the only actual archangel that's mentioned in the Bible. Now, if you're Catholic, you kind of looks like a pansy, kind of a feminine.
Transgender.
Yeah, I don't know what it is with those Catholics. I picture Michael. I like to try to think of something a little someone who's gonna go and smite some hinder parts, to be King James about it.
The hand.
Big armor on the fingers.
Just like Thanos.
Yeah. Now he probably won't have the. I don't think he's gonna have the wings, because those are only cherubs that have that. But I don't know. There's probably debate about it. But anyway, he's not some little pansy. He's like probably the second most powerful being after God, and equal footing with Satan. And Jude 1:9, it says, "Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses." So this is the only time that Michael is actually revealed as being an archangel. And he's also revealed as, he's called one of the chief princes. In Daniel 10:13 says, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me." This is that messenger angel that God sent down. "Withstood me 120 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia." So what I believe this implies is that he has peers. I mean, there's other angels that are equal to him, because if he's one of the chief princes, it must mean there's other chief princes, other archangels that you might say. And this kind of shoots down one of the verses you can use like with Jehovah's Witnesses, because they believe that Jesus is Michael. They believe that they're one and the same, and that he's like the highest like angel of all. But apparently, if that was true, then there's a lot of other people or angels that are at the same level of Michael, and we know that that's not true. So like I said, the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that he's Michael, but this shows that there's other ones too. Traditionally, going to like some other extra biblical sources, they believe that there's 7 archangels per the book of Enoch. It's like Michael, Raphael, Gabriel. You know, we hear Gabriel mentioned in the Bible, like when you talk to Mary and you talk about her bearing a son, but he isn't revealed as an archangel. But tradition has these 7, and Lucifer supposedly was an archangel before he fell and became Satan.
How do you say that?
Which one?
2 lists.
Sarakel, Raguel. I'm not sure. Really, just that's how they were spelled.
Those are all in the Bible?
No. This is like in the book of Enoch. These would be the ones
yeah,
identified in the book of Enoch. There's other ones too, and there's actually like, especially like, the Catholics like to lift all this stuff up, and they'll actually say like Michael is like the protecting warrior. Gabriel is like the messenger angel. There's one of them that's like the protector of like nature and animals. There's another one that's like in charge of encouraging people, or they like to do their things with angels and saints and pray to
their
them.
names are similar too, like the AEL, EL.
Yeah.
It would make sense though. I was actually thinking that I've thought that before. I don't study the Catholic religion obviously, but it would make sense that the other chief princes had certain jobs.
Right. Like
Yeah.
an army.
Yeah.
Right, I agree.
That's how God would.
Yeah, I mean, I'll dig into a little bit more about Michael here. It's just some interesting things about him, but I'm sure that the rest of them have their own ministries and jobs that they're doing too. Michael is very specific. Like, his job is that he stands guard over Israel. That's his assignment. And obviously Israel as the centerpiece in God's plan and affections, like God's going to put his most powerful, capable angel in charge over it. And Daniel 12:1 says, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. Daniel, there it is, 10:21. This is the messenger angel speaking again. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince. So he's speaking to Daniel, a Jewish young man. I don't know, probably still young at the time. I don't know how much time had passed in Babylon there, but he specifically says that Michael is your prince. So we know that he is the prince over Israel. We know that Michael directly opposes Satan, so he's got to have some power. In Jude 9, we see yet Michael the Archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. These are the only words in the Bible that Michael is recorded as having actually spoken. So he's on par to directly oppose Satan with no problem. Michael is a military commander. He's a high-ranking military officer among the angels. In Revelation 12:7-9 says, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. So Michael has angels and authority under him. So he seems like he's like a general, or he's a very high-ranking military commander. Michael battles the demonic princes of other nations in Daniel 10:13. Question?
Do you know when that last reference to Michael, if that was supposed to be in the beginning of before Genesis, basically? Is that what that's referencing there?
That's a good question.
Now, if you want to get into a gap and stuff.
No, I was just curious because I didn't know if that passage it was talking past tense or if it was saying present tense.
Yeah, I viewed it as in the future, because it talks about the devil and his demons being cast down to the earth, and then their time is short, and he's going to have great wrath, and that's going to be during the tribulation.
But it also said there was war in heaven, so
Yeah.
the demons and
It started in heaven, Michael and Satan and his demons must have brought some sort of an attack on God's kingdom somehow, and Michael was brought with his angels to fight and repel them.
Oh, so you're saying this isn't future,
I think it is. I mean, when I read it, and the thing is,
So how would Satan get into heaven? again.
Well, I think they're still allowed in the heavens. I don't think that they're just limited to earth right now. We see in
I
Job,
thought like the earth was his domain.
he is like he rules over the earth. He's kind of taken like Adam's authority. He's called the prince and power of the air. He's called the God of this world. And even when Satan tempted Jesus in the wilderness, he said, bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all these kingdoms because they're mine to give. So, and
But
that,
he might be referring
I just-
to in Job.
Yeah, I don't know what if because I'm not reading the whole chapter, so I guess I just wasn't sure because what made me think of it, it says he fought against the dragon, which
yeah,
we've talked about before, the dragon being the tempter in the garden,
yeah,
and then him,
right. Well, he's
possibly it being a dragon in the garden.
yeah. Well, he's still in that form, even in all the way into Revelation. He's still like called a
Right.
dragon.
Right. I just thought it was interesting because how God makes him. He makes him the beast crawl on his belly for the rest of time, right?
Yeah.
So that's all. That's why I was thinking maybe this was supposed to be like in that passage. Maybe it was talking. I don't know.
I can see where you can say that or think that, because it also talks about how he pulls down like a third of the angels.
Right.
And people say, well, that would have been in like the Old Testament or like before creation, possibly in the gap, if you believe in a gap. But it says specifically in Revelation 4 that when John is called up to heaven, earlier in Revelation it says, and I will show you the things that were, and then the things that are. And then in Revelation 4, when John's called up to heaven, picture of the rapture, it says, and now I'll show you the things that will be, or that are here to come, or that are to come. And this comes after that. So it sounds to me like everything after Revelation 4 is future. And this falls into that whole future section of Revelation. So I think that in Revelation, in the tribulation, that there will be like this war in heaven and more angels he's actually going to bring down with him.
See, that's shocking to me when you think about that. Like that if we take things out of context and we really don't read it all, like we believe something for so long until we really, really study, like a Berean, study the word. And like that was really bothering me, like that more angels are going to fall. Because if you put that into perspective as to how John sees, like he said, things in the past, present, and future, that's something that's written within the future section, and it's like, wait a minute, I thought that already happened. I picture there being a war in heaven, and God threw Satan and the demons down to earth. I mean, I learned all that as a kid, and so there was things that happened in the garden, obviously. But this specifically is like a war, and with angels falling, which is like future, and that's like really crazy to think about. Like that more angels, it's not over. More could even fall. But yeah, that's an interesting verse that
One of the
there's so much to Revelation. It's just
I
crazy.
know. And we've always said like, well, like how could angels that like see God and see everything he's doing like be capable of like rebelling against him and falling? And I just came across something just briefly in my studies over the past few days. Somebody wrote a book or something that believes that like Satan believes his own lie that he's propagating on the earth now, which is like evolution. Satan's like biggest lie in the world is how like we all evolved. God didn't create us. We all evolved over millions of years. That maybe even Satan believes that himself. Because he obviously doesn't maybe remember his own birth or like creation whenever God made the angels, and maybe he thinks that he can become like God just with given enough time. Like he can gain enough power and evolve into God. I don't know. It's just something that I heard recently that's kind of interesting. So Michael battles the demonic princes of other nations, Daniel 10:13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 120 days, and lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So we looked at this already, where this angel was sent to give Daniel this vision, and literally the satanic forces withheld this angel for 21 days until Michael was called out. And as soon as Michael showed up, apparently they were able to break through the demonic blockade and was able to get this message through. So the point of talking about Michael and kind of digging into all this, which I kind of thought was a cool point, is that when Jesus comes to get his bride, he calls on his top brass for an amazing military escort. I mean, even in the world, if you look at any of the royal like weddings and stuff, when a king comes out, I mean, he's got his military with him. You know, he's got a military escort. A king just doesn't walk out alone and drive alone through the streets. I mean, he's got his his top brass like following him, and you know, just like the president. You know, you see a whole motorcade. You know, there's like 20 cars going down the street. You know, when a leader or a king, a ruler goes out, and he calls on the best. I mean, Michael is like top of the line, powerful, and I can also imagine that at the point of the rapture, I'm sure Satan's going to be like wanting to do something. I mean, Satan's got to know about the rapture. He's got to like, I mean, he hears what we're talking about. I'm sure he's like trying to figure out like, what can I do? You know, like, I mean, if he's going to call these people, how can I wreck this? How can I mess up God's plans? You know, in this whole rapture thing. So it's like Satan's not going to have any chance to do anything, because you got Jesus himself going forth. You got Michael, possibly the angels that are under Michael. You know, a whole like military escort to escort the bride of Christ up to heaven. It's no surprise that angels are involved in such an event in Jesus' life. We see that angels announced Christ's birth. Most of the Gospels, I think there's angels there, like bringing the message to Mary and Joseph and to the shepherds. Angels announced when Christ was resurrected. When the apostles and the women came to the tomb, there was angels there. You know, they gave them the message, like, Jesus isn't here, he's raised. When Christ ascended, and they watched him go to heaven, they turned and there's two angels standing there, and they're like, well, why are you looking up? You know, Jesus is coming back the same way. So we see, you know, angels are involved whenever God's coming and going and doing things. So people like to think about, what does this voice actually say? Most people say that it says something to the, like, come up hither. I believe it's like a call to ascend. In Revelation 4, we looked when John had his revelation. He heard the voice, as it were, of a trumpet saying, come up hither. In Revelation 11:12, after those two witnesses were killed and laid in the street for 3 days, they were resurrected, and then they heard a voice saying, come up hither, and they ascended up to heaven in a cloud. Name calling. Jesus, or God, frequently calls a person by name to get their attention. You see a lot of times in the Bible with like Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Samuel, Ananias, Saul. Many times God's like, Abraham, Abraham. Abraham's like, here I am, Lord. You know, or here I am. So the proper response is, here I am. If you ever hear like the voice of God calling you, you know, Caleb, Caleb, just say, here I am.
I'm here, don't miss me.
So yeah, and like
You're like running out to the people.
I'm here.
you know, we see that Jesus called Lazarus by name when he resurrected him. John 11:43. And when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And a lot of people kind of like to joke around that Jesus had to be very careful at this point, because they're saying that if Jesus wasn't specific and said, Lazarus, come forth, that possibly all the dead within the sound of his voice would have been getting up out of their graves, because he has so much power. If he would have just said, come forth, it would have just like called everybody up. So Jesus had to be very specific. Like, Lazarus, get back in there. You know? So possibly we're going to hear something like our name and then come up hither. You know, and if it's the Archangel speaking, it could be like, you know, like I said, like a military thing. A lot of times at a military function or something, they announce like who's showing up. You know, it would be like, you know, Caleb, come up hither. That Caleb, come up hither.
It'd be cool if everyone heard
Jacob,
their own voice.
come up hither.
Yeah.
You know, everyone heard their own name called.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what.
Like
That's what.
specifically.
That's what he's
Yeah,
saying.
because like through the Bible, people like heard God speak their name before He called them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to hear a shout, and that's going to be like number one thing to alert us, like, okay, something's happening. Then we're going to hear a voice calling us, but it's not time to go up yet. So this isn't like just like people.
You gotta shower first, right?
Yeah, right. You know, people see that in the verse where it talks about the twinkling of an eye. they think that's the whole rapture. Like the whole thing's going to happen in the twinkling of an eye. But no, it actually happens in parts. I mean, there's a shout, and then there's a voice.
Are you gonna go over the twinkling, what it is?
Yeah, we're going to do it.
Isn't there a trumpet?
Yeah.
The last trumpet.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
There's a shout, there's a voice.
I wasn't sure if the trumpet came first, but the shout comes
There,
first.
look at it.
There it is, the trump
Is it gonna
of
be that big?
God.
Is that the right scale?
I don't know, could be. I mean, if the Earth is this footstool, I
Yeah.
guess that'll like blow away half our atmosphere if that thing goes off. No one's gonna miss that. Blow a big hole into the ground.
Whoops, too loud. Like,
Oh, yeah, turn it down.
A hole in the ground.
Maybe that creates the bottomless pit that everyone gets thrown into later on. Anyway, trump of God.
black hole.
1 Thessalonians 4:16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, and with the voice of the Archangel, and with the trump of God. And we'll also see in 1 Corinthians 15:52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound. There's a lot of confusion about trumpets, because trumpets in the Bible, I mean, they're all through the Bible. They announce things, and there's a bunch of trumpets, like in the end times, and people get them messed up, and it messes up your doctrine. Basically, there's three types of trumpets in the Bible. There's human trumpets used by Israel to make announcements, calls to arms, call to assembly. We see that in Numbers 10, 1 through 10, where God actually establishes the use of trumpets for signaling. I'll look at that in a little while, actually. There's angelic trumpets used to announce judgments or victories. We see, like, specifically, like the 7 trumpets in Revelation. They have angels blowing trumpets there. And then there's divine trumpets, where God himself will blow a trumpet. God's got some musical talent, so he, at some very major events in human history, God uses a trumpet. So the trump of God is also referred to as the last trump that we saw. It's a divine trumpet. It's the trump of God. It's not the trump of an angel. There's only 3 times that I've found that God blows a trumpet in Scripture. And my theology had to take a little adaptation here, because I was thinking all this time that there was only twice that God blew a trumpet. And so I'm like making my message and like, oh, there's only 2 times, and we're going to look at this time and this time. And then like I'm almost done, and I find this one little verse in like the Minor Prophets where it says that God's going to blow a trumpet. And I think it's probably the second coming that he's going to blow the trumpet. So actually, I guess there's 3 times that God blows a trumpet, but they're all very important events. The last trump that we hear at the rapture, I believe, points to the first trump, which is the first time that God blew a trumpet. And that is in Exodus 19. We'll go over there and take a look, because there's like some amazing comparisons to be drawn from the book of Exodus and like the rapture. Let's see, Exodus 19. So this is after the Jews had come out of Egypt, and they were traveling through the wilderness, and God was going before them, and God brought them up to Mount Sinai. And God had a plan to interact with the people. So I look at verse 13, talking about the mountain, because God was going to come down. I didn't want to read too much of it, but it says, "There shall not an hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet soundeth long, they shall come up to the mount." Over to verse 16. "And it came to pass on the third day in the morning," remember that, "third day in the morning, that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace. and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. And then over 20:18. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they were moved and stood far off. So, as I pointed out, this happened on the third day. God told the people to prepare, and it happened in the morning on the third day. And continue on with their whole day is 1,000 years thing. The 2,000 years are just about up, and we're going to start that third millennium, and it's going to be early on that third millennial day that the rapture is going to occur. So there's a little picture of that there. It's interesting to note that God came down to the top of Mount Sinai. He didn't come all the way down to the people in the camp. He just came down to the top of the mountain, but not all the way down. So it was like kind of a partial coming down for God. He didn't come all the way down to the people. He came down in clouds. He came down with a trumpet. I don't know if any of this is sounding familiar. God called up Moses to meet him. And then after Moses had communed with God and he came back down, his face was glorified. He had a shiny face. So looking at the pictures here, like compared to trying to compare it to like the rapture, there was a major dispensational change at that time. God gave them the law. He established the covenant of the law. He established Israel as a nation at that point. And he also established the proper way to worship him. He, before then, people just, wherever they lived, they'd build their own little altar, they'd sacrifice one of their goats, they'd pray, they'd worship him. But God actually established a proper way to worship him, like what the altar had to be like and look like, what it had to be made out of, where you could be to worship him. So that was something that he established. So the second trump of God, the trump that we're going to hear, hopefully one of these days, we read those verses. The Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, the voice of the Archangel, and with the trump of God. And in 1 Corinthians, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound. So we see there's a debate over, because it says the last trump, and that causes people confusion. The last trump is not a trumpet. There's a difference between a trump and a trumpet. A trump is the sound it makes. So it's not the same as the actual instrument, a trumpet. So when it says the last trump, it means the last in a sequence, or the last, that there's more than one trump. And so like in the Old Testament, they had this whole system set up with signaling and stuff. It's the last blast in a sequence. And turn over to Numbers 10. Let's see, I found this very interesting. Verses 1 through 10. All right. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Make thee 2 trumpets of silver. Of a whole piece shalt thou make them, that thou mayest use them for the calling of the assembly, and for the journeying of the camps. And when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to thee at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And if they blow but with one trumpet, then the princes, which are heads of the thousands of Israel, shall gather themselves unto thee. And then when you blow an alarm, then the camps that lie in the east part shall go forward, and when you blow an alarm the second time. So there's a difference between just a blast or 2 blasts. But in these first couple of verses here, how many trumpets were they told to make? 2. And if both trumpets are blown, what's the purpose of both trumpets being blown? It says, and when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to thee at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. What happens if they only blow one trumpet?
Just the princes together.
Right. And And if they blow but with one trumpet, then the princes, which are heads of the thousands of Israel, shall gather themselves unto thee. So there's a difference. If they blow one trumpet, calls up the leaders, princes of the people. If they blow two trumpets, it's a call for everybody to gather. Do anybody remember that we just read in Exodus there how many trumpets were blown at the mountain on Sinai? It only referred to one trumpet. It just said the voice of the trumpet, and it was a long, long trump that like gradually got louder and louder. So it sounds like on Mount Sinai there was one trumpet blown,
Because he was calling up the leader.
and he was calling up Moses because he called up. And then like there's some other verses where like he had Aaron kind of come up, but nobody else came all the way up. Like Moses came up, and then like Aaron, and then some of the other leaders were called up. It's kind of interesting because just before that, remember Moses' father-in-law Jethro, how Moses was like exhausted because he was like sitting like all day, like judging people from morning to night, judging the people, and he was like exhausted. And his father-in-law said, "You know what you're doing? This isn't good. You need to like pick people and put them over heads over thousands, heads over hundreds, heads over tens." So it's almost like Moses instituted a government at that point. Up until then, Moses was like the only one. He was like leading all the people. Everybody came to him, and he was just weird because he just sat there like all day long judging like all these like trivial little cases. And his father-in-law told him, set up a system here. Have people under you and bring you the really serious stuff, and the other stuff, let them handle what's being done. So it's almost like Moses established kind of like a government with leaders, and then right after that we have God blowing the trumpet, which calls the leaders up. And he called up Moses primarily, but there are some other verses that talk about the other princes or the leaders being called like partially up the mountain, but they couldn't go as far up as Moses did. So we see one trumpet called the princes and leaders to assembly. Two trumpets called, that happened on Mount Sinai, Moses, Aaron, and the leaders were called. Two trumpets called together the whole assembly. And two trumpets, this is what happens at the rapture, hence the last trumpet. I think God's going to use this same thing that he established in Numbers 10. Two trumpets, I don't know if they're at the same time, or if it's going to be like a lower, it could be like a lower trumpet and then a higher trumpet. So like you're going to hear like, I tend to think like two like separate trumpet blasts, because it says the last trump, so you'll probably hear like a and at that second one, that's like when you get ready, because that's when the twinkling is going to happen at that second trump, because that's the last trump. I think it's pretty clear from Numbers 10 there were two trumpets.
But what if it's 100 trumpet blasts? Because isn't that part of the Jewish feast? The Feast of Trumpets. They do 100.
That was the one
Right.
theory.
Well,
the
that's-
one theory
that's
you guys
it.
are talking about.
I'm saying the last trump is a trump of God. It's not going to be a human blowing it.